Good day, you're watching Business World Live. I'm Danie, Laurel.
And I'm Delos Santos. Here are today's top stories. Inflation jumps to 6.1% in June, its highest level since October 2018.
NEDA Chief Arsenio Balisacan defends President Bongbong Marcos's decision to veto the bill seeking to create an economic zone near the proposed Bulacan Airport. Balisacan says the veto is not expected to dampen investor confidence.
Secretary Balisacan also downplays the peso's depreciation versus the dollar, but he admits that hitting the government's revised growth target for 2022 could be challenging.
And demand for office space surges to its highest level since 2020. We begin our broadcast with June inflation coming in at 6.1%. That is the highest level we've seen since October of 2018.
Now, year-to-date, average inflation stands at 4.4%, breaching the 2 to 4% target set by the Bangko Sentral. June inflation is a jump from the 5.4% recorded in May and the 3.7% in the same period last year. This is also above the 6% median estimate of 16 analysts in a Businessworld poll conducted last week. The top drivers of inflation growth for the month of June includes food and non-alcoholic beverages, transportation costs, and housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuels.
Now, Socio-Economic Planning Secretary Arsenio Balisacan believes President Marcos's veto of the Bulacan Ecozone bill will not drive away investors. Balisacan explains that foreign investors are more concerned with the ease of doing business than the fiscal incentives provided by economic zones. He says the veto is also consistent with the previous administration's push for sustainable and cost-efficient tax perks.
It's really, I think, going back to basics. And what really deters investors to come in the Philippines. And again, if you look at all these indicators that are produced comparatively globally, it's the cost of doing business, or at least it has to do with the work, with the how long it takes to register, how you know. How difficult it is to grow for business and yet to grow profitably and yet addressing issues like
However, the bill's sponsor, Senator Amy Marcos, expressed disappointment over her brother's decision, saying it could have a chilling effect on potential investors. She also pointed out that the bill does actually provide audit provisions for COA, contrary to what Marcos Jr. wrote in his veto letter.
I feel that there's no chilling effect. Ang yan, talagang alam ng kapatid ko to, magaling ang aking ate. Magaling si Bongbong. Ang kinatatakutan ko, baka hindi naaral ng maigi or may naggagaling-galingan.
Meanwhile, SMC President Ramon Ang says they will work with the government in perfecting the economic zone bill, noting that the government stands to gain at least 11 trillion pesos in yearly export revenues if it pushes through. And despite the veto, Ang says the company would still proceed with building an international airport in Bulacan.
Meanwhile, NEDA Chief Arsenio Balisacan downplays the peso's weakening against the dollar despite being flagged by economists as a potential barrier to growth. However, Balisacan admits that it may be challenging to hit growth targets for this year. Shaila Francisco with the rest of the story.
Citing external factors, economic managers of the Duterte administration has slashed the government's growth target for 2022 to 7 to 8% from 7 to 9% previously. But Socio-Economic Planning Secretary Arsenio Balisacan admits hitting the lower target could still be a tall order.
Given the unexpected surges in some of these prices and the discussion initially triggered by this Ukraine war invasion, 78% would be might be a big challenge, no? But still, if we can grow at 6 to 7% during the this year, that will be remarkable. Will probably remain among the fastest growing countries.
Despite this, Balisacan downplays risks of stagflation, a situation where elevated inflation persists and slow growth and high unemployment mar the economy.
I don't think that we'll get there. In the recent exercises of our team, we have already taken into account some of those increases, and it doesn't look like that it will dampen much the prospects of the economy.
Balisacan maintains that the new administration's priority is to return to the high growth trajectory of about 6% throughout their term. However, he stresses that growth should be more inclusive and pro-poor. The Marcos Jr. administration thus aims to bring down poverty level to a single digit by 2028, from the 23.7% recorded as of the first half of 2021. Aside from providing more quality jobs, they also plan to continue providing targeted subsidies as soaring prices continue to affect poverty reduction targets. And just like his predecessor Carl Chua, Secretary Balisacan supports the full resumption of face-to-face classes in a bid to avert scaring issues in the education sector.
It's clear that our hospitals show that we can manage the risks at this point, and so there's no reason why you should not open up the schools, because as I said earlier, the cost of that scaring is on human capital it's not going to affect us now, but it's going to affect the future of these children, of our children, when they join the labor market.
As for taxes, Balisacan knows that while there is a need to eventually raise taxes, the timing should also be considered. Shaila Francisco, We Are One News.
Oil firms are implementing a big-time price rollback today, but only for diesel and kerosene. Now, prices of diesel are slashed by 3 pesos per liter, while kerosene prices went down by 3 pesos and 40 centavos. The rollback snaps 5 straight weeks of price hikes for diesel and 4 consecutive weeks of increase for gasoline. However, there are no price adjustments for gasoline today.
Now, Transport Secretary Jaime Bautista says he will prioritize solving the road transport problem in the country. This as the current status quo is, quote, unacceptable to the president. Bautista explained that as someone who is not immune to the difficulties of road travel, he will try his best to improve the quality of public transportation in the Philippines.
I don't think the status quo is acceptable to the president. Yung transport sector, napakahirap po ng sector ng land. That's why we will work closely with everybody. No?
Now, President Marcos is currently presiding over the first cabinet meeting in Malacanang. Vice President and Education Secretary Sara Duterte Carpio is also present in the event. Cabinet secretaries are discussing various matters of national interest, including key items from the agriculture, finance, transportation, and education sectors. Economic managers are also expected to brief the president about the country's economic state. Pausing for a quick break, but coming right up after that. Just how is inflation affecting the real estate sector?
We'll talk to an industry leader for the lowdown when Businessworld Live returns. Stay with us.
Muna yun, guess natin.
Okay. Hi, David. Good morning. And you're still watching Businessworld live here on One News. I'm Delos Santos.
And I'm Danie, Laurel. Now, office space demand jumped to its highest in the second quarter. Does this signal a return to pre-pandemic levels for the market?
Now, to discuss that, as well as the President's veto of the Bulacan Economic Zone, we have on the show David Leechiu, CEO of Leechiu Property Consultants. David, good morning. Thank you for joining us. I think you're on mute.
Can you come off of mute, David? There we go.
Let's double check again. Let's check that again. Can you hear us now? Can we have a bit of an audio check with you, David?
Hello.
All right, good. Okay.
Well, thank you for having me on the show.
Our pleasure, of course. Now, again, let's pick up on that report regarding the veto of the economic zone in Bulacan here. How is that possibly going to affect the property market in the central Luzon? I mean, it's not yet completely off the table here, but is that delay going to be worrisome?
Yeah, I guess this is part of the transition between old and new administrations, and both parties have to just align. I'm sure the previous administration had very good reasons to make changes at this early stage in the new administration. So, and of course, the proponents on the other side will also have reasons to see how it could be restored. At the end of the day, I think it's still very early days. Because the plot of land we're talking about isn't being marketed to any of the foreigners just yet, although there are funders waiting behind the scenes to be able to get this project going. People just want to get this project off the ground, literally, and everyone's hoping that the airport is completed sooner rather than later.
Do you agree with NEDA Secretary Balisacan when he says that this will not really hamper foreign investors simply because they care less about the incentives and more about, let's say, ease of doing business? But then you do have Senator Amy Marcos saying this might cause,
a chilling effect.
A chilling effect. That's what she said. So the question here is, do you agree that the president should be reviewing all of these incentives right now, or should we just be doing status quo and implementing what was already done by the previous admin?
I think there is a concern that I think the biggest concern that many people have is how to manage this debt, and I guess they have, with every person very smart in the room on both camps, they have every reason to review and did what they did. So I don't think, not knowing the behind the scenes activities is kind of. I wouldn't want to preempt or presume anything on why certain things were being done. But I think the biggest issue is how to manage the debt of the government. And I suppose the incentives will either make the government feel like they are losing out on revenue that they otherwise could have incurred. And so this is one of the biggest tax events of the business sector. The size of this project the entire landmass is probably something like 2,500 hectares. If you count all the other peripheral developments, that's a massive tax base from just the real estate perspective alone. What about the transfer of titles? What about funding? What about doc stamps when it comes to the debt and companies that are going to be erected and created on back of this project? So there's many things that the government's kind of busy evaluating right now, and being one of the biggest sources of funding, meaning tax revenue. I guess the government has every right and measure to be able to review the incentives it's given in the previous administration.
A quick follow-up on that, David. I mean, you have now PESA coming forward with a proposal that instead of coming up with a new legislation, why not register the economic zone under PESA? Is that a more viable option given your experience as well with PESA?
I think in the last 35 years since PESA was created, I do think that PESA is the best platform for many foreign investors to qualify for that, whether you're BPO, manufacturing, tourism. And now that it's in place, we would encourage that to continue to be rolled out to investors and to the both local and foreign, because the PESA laws today only tax only give tax incentives to tenants. They continue to tax the other side of the equation, which is the developer side. Whoever puts up the building, whoever builds the roads, all those people will continue to be taxed entities. It's really just the tenants locating in these places that are going to enjoy tax incentives. So indirectly, the government is still taxing those tenants by way of capturing the revenue from the tenants to the landlords.
David, speaking of, what's the update on this? I think it was 30% work in the office or no incentives, and people trying to seek for a more hybrid and more flexible arrangement. What is the sector lobbying for at this moment, and what's being given to them?
I do think that some compromise will be achieved between the BPO sector and the government. The BPO sector is the largest employer of the Philippines, and it is responsible for why it is a meaningful factor on why the Philippines continues to perform gracefully through COVID and through every other global crisis that has hit the world in the last 25 years. And so we do need to listen to the needs of the BPO sector. I do think there will be a compromise in the works because we all have to appreciate that 120,000 people, new jobs are created in the Philippines because of the BPO sector. Last year, at the time when globally people are contracting jobs, and there's a lot of talk about the upcoming recession in the US. That frankly excites me very much because that event will continue to bring more jobs to the Philippines once people figure things out in the West.
Okay, more to that point, are we well positioned to actually absorb that should that impending recession, especially in the West, really blow up? At the same time, I mean, like what you mentioned earlier, there's been remarkable growth in the office space demand here, especially for the second quarter, 106%, at least quarter on quarter, mostly, of course, driven by outsourcing companies. So do you expect that momentum to carry on?
I do expect it to carry on because we are continuing to talk to many brands who have big plans for Philippines. We just leased out a very big building called 5 Neo of the SM and Rufino family. That's a 55,000 square meter leasable building, and we did it at the height of COVID. The entire building is 100% leased out, and that would not have been possible in this time if not for the BPO sector continuing to grow. And it wouldn't be possible if it was not a reaction to the cost-saving programs that many corporations are adopting as a result of COVID and Ukraine. And now that this third element, this third level of uncertainty, the recession in the US, is entering the equation, more companies are saying, okay, we don't have time to experiment in other labor markets. There really is just one India. There really is just one Philippines. We can't find labor markets of that scale for that price anywhere else in the world. We will continue to do this expansion in the Philippines and India. And just as they expand in provincial sites in India, they will continue to expand in the Philippines.
David, what's your sentiment or feeling on the position of the new administration with regard to POGOs? Are they going to be more welcoming, crack down? Give us your take.
There's a lot of heat in this morning, Danie. So, I mean, I'm trying to sidestep these issues. So, the good news is that we do need the POGO sector if we want to bring the office sector back to pre-COVID levels, because the POGO sector was such a big component of office demand. I don't see that coming so quickly. This early in the administration, I think it's too early to say. However, for the first time in 24 months, we have seen 21,000 square meters of space. Actually, office leasing being done in the POGO sector in the last 3 months. So the periods from April, May, and June. And is that coincidental and timed with the onset of the new administration? We don't know. However, the ones who occupy and continue to pay rent, they are starting to populate their office space again. The companies from the POGO sector. Second is that the dormitories that they vacated 2 years ago because they couldn't come back to the Philippines, they're starting to repopulate them again. It is a very strong sign that they are starting to expand again in the Philippines. How fast? Too early to say. I am very hopeful, but life could be disappointing also.
But does that mean also that they're more and more coming to terms with the new tax regime for POGOs?
I would think so. I would think so. And it's not just about China, like we always said. I mean, it's not just always about China. And like this particular company we're servicing, they only have 5% of the employees that are China-based. The market they service is almost just 5% Chinese, and everything else is regional or European. So there are more and more companies like that discovering the Philippines. It's not just Chinese companies. And the opening of borders is what's allowing them to come back in. And unfortunately, those borders took time to open because, COVID was such a wild card. But I think we're getting there.
David, last question before we let you go. Of course, we had the inflation print 6.1% for June, and Medallia now saying 3.5% might be by the end of the year the interest rate. Tell us, has that really affected the sector? Are you expecting that to hamper demand, especially when we talk about residential properties and people trying to get loans here?
Yes. So I think the biggest impact to the property market is that it is slowing down the phenomenon of going back to the office. Because many employees are saying, I don't like to work at home anymore. I am tired of mom and dad hovering over me or the kids or whatever. And I want to go back to the office, but it's just too expensive for me to do that. And not everyone can afford to shuttle everyone point to point. Number two, COVID continues to be an issue. Number three, the dorm market is going to cater again to the local users, the local employees, not just to the foreigners, precisely because it will be cheaper for them to rent a dorm than it is to commute, especially now when prices of fuel are continuing to climb. And it's come to the point where dorming is still going to be cheaper than commuting.
True.
In every sense of the word.
Okay, so very interesting points. There are a lot of things to digest. Thank you so much, David Leechiu, CEO of Leechiu Property Consultants.
Thank you.
And those are the biggest stories on the economic and corporate front today. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danie Laurel. We are One News, all sides, all the time. Don't go away. We'll give you the latest on the local bourse when Business World Live returns. Stay with us.
And we're still watching Business World live here on One News. Dan, let's get right to it. How's the peso moving on the back of that inflation print?
All right, very interestingly, Jess, the peso is actually strengthening a touch here. Of course, with a higher than expected inflation print, there's also possibly going to be a more aggressive rate hike, and that tends to strengthen the peso because the differential between our interest rate and the U.S. will be smaller. And if you want to believe the UP prof, Balisacan, he says, let's not worry about the depreciation of the peso. He does say, while high commodity prices are obviously a threat here, Jess, it does not dampen the prospects of the economy. Now, let's see how our index is moving 30 minutes into the trading day. Also strengthening as well. Even on the back of that higher than expected print, we're actually up by 1%, trading at 62.43 against the greenback. And I just wanted to take a look at the property sector, of course, with David Leechiu on our show here. And the index is actually up by 0.8%, even as, we did expect some sentiment-driven pain here because of the higher interest rates, but doesn't seem to be the case. And finally, Jess, before we end the broadcast, just a very quick check at San Miguel. What's going on? Well, the past 3 days has seen it, trudging down on the back of that veto. But then as more things came into the fore and more clarity was expressed by the presidential cabinet, it did come back up. It does seem to be losing a peso here. That's down by 1%, trading at 106 pesos this morning.
All right, finally, a sight for sore eyes here, both for the main index and the peso. Let's see if that continues for the rest of the trading day. And that's it for today, July 5, 2022. Join us again tomorrow at exactly 9:30 a.m. You can also catch us on Signal Play. Register for a free account now at www.signalplay.com and stream One News Live anytime, anywhere. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danie Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. We are One News.